was up staying at Oswick with a school party on a geological field trip, and I slipped across to Settle one afternoon when I should have been doing something else, and there was this rather portly gentleman standing leaning against the wall at the side of this archway off the main street through Settle. And I was looking for Commercial Yard, which was the name of this address for the BSA, walked past this guy, knocked on a door, got no reply, turned round to walk away again, and he came across and said, "Are you looking for someone?" And I said, "I'm looking for a gentleman called Simpson." And he said, "Well, that will be me then." And that was how it started with me. I'd got this rapidly developing interest in caves and caving. I wanted to try and pick up on as much information as possible. And here it was. Someone opened the door and it was all in front of me.
I was told to go and meet him in the Royal Oak, and somebody came along and said, "I'll show you in the Royal Oak." I remember he was one of the people bought me a booze, and never again, because I never wasn't all that much on boozing. But I remember having meeting him in the Royal Oak it was, and having a discussion with him about caving and things then.
Simmy was one of those people who was prepared to use people without a doubt. It was a trade-off. He would give something in return for some people's time to go and do the things he wanted them to look at. I think that this was like surrogate caving, wasn't it? That he was most likely way past his sell-by date for going underground, and so he relied on other people to go and do these things, come back and tell him all about it, produce surveys, photos, you name it.
I was very flattered that he did, and I'm very pleased that he did. I like being used by other people, especially if it's good. I always like doing that sort of thing. That's one of the things I really liked about Simmy. It was somebody there I could go in. Now, what can I do to help you? What do you got? Where can I help you on this thing? And off you'd go.
I learnt quite early on that there was this hiatus or this hatred or whatever it was with a man called Eli Simpson who lived in Settle. I suppose I must have been curious as to why the hell this was. Anyway, I went there, and very quickly he told me the story. He's a big story that the clubs like the Craven Pothole Club and the Bradford, they just do repeat trips down Hull Pothole wherever every other weekend, and that's not what caving is about. It's about going places and finding things, and it was a bit like the sort of the Treasure Island story, Long John Silver and all that lot. You know, he had maps, he had stacks of records and photographs, and he could tell me where I could go and give me the tools and find caverns measureless to man.
It would be impossible to tell the story of cave exploration in the north of England without mentioning the name of Eli Simpson. He was, without doubt, the greatest collector of information about caves that England had ever witnessed. He was also a highly skilled pioneer of cave photography and won prizes internationally for his photographs, particularly the huge print of Gaping Gill Main Chamber which adorned his office. His cave maps and surveys were immaculately presented and would set the standard for years to come. It was surely his passion for caves that drove him to try to lift cave exploration, and particularly the recording of information, to a more systematic and coordinated level. And that led to the setting up of the British Speleological Association, Britain's first national caving body. Nevertheless, he was a controversial character who could be manipulative, scheming and forceful to achieve his own ends. Sadly, that would eventually destroy much of what he tried so hard to create. Eli Simpson was born in 1884. He lived with his family in Oswick. His father produced cloth from a mill which he sold in Leeds. By his late teens, Simmy, as he became known, had developed interests further afield and was soon caving with members of the Yorkshire Ramblers Club. Pictures in 1903 show him at Timpany Joint at Greenhow with Fred Bottrell, and outside nearby Stumpcross Caverns with J. Evans, Henry Williamson and Bottrell, where he apparently made his first attempt to make some sort of map of the cave. Over the following couple of years he was actively caving, keeping notes and mapping wherever he went. He is seen here in East Passage of Gaping Gill with Emma Mitchell. In 1906 he formed the Leeds-based Yorkshire Speleological Association with Fred Howarth. It was launched ambitiously, a sign of things to come. By the following year, not only had the YSA its own rule book, but by combining forces with the Derbyshire Pennine Club, they managed to organise a meet at Gaping Gill, complete with a hand winch. Simpson was clearly very actively involved, seen here on the winch, and in another shot by the jib, a large timber with an attached pulley which enabled a clear descent of main shaft from what is now known as Jib Tunnel. Simmy was almost certainly active underground. The meet was notable, first for a considerable flood, but also for the discovery and exploration of what was at first named Flood Exit. The discovery was probably brought about by the inactivity caused by the flood, and was named because it provided an emergency exit when the main shaft became impassable. The survey shown here is dated 1909, but it was drawn up many years later from his earlier notes, when the name had been changed to reflect its other purpose as an alternative way into Gaping Gill. In May 1912, the members of the Yorkshire Speleological Association were photographed at the Hill Inn in Chapel-Dale. Simpson, in the back row, looks thoughtful. The club was already in decline, and Simmy was no longer the club secretary. Two things were about to change his life. Firstly, in December that year, he got married. That being the cause or not, the next 2 years saw almost no caving activity. Then, in 1914, the Great War began, and there were other things to worry about. Simmy was enlisted in the Royal Army Ordnance Corps and sent to Mesopotamia. He returned a damaged man.
His health, I think, was most likely largely ruined by his experiences in what was called Mesopotamia, when I think he came back with malaria. And in those days there weren't the sort of anti-malarial drugs available that there are currently, and he suffered for the rest of his days with that. He had good days and he had very, very bad days. If you happened to catch him on one of those bad days, if you got 2 grunts and a nod out of him, you were doing well. On a good day he'd talk for hours.
Soon after his return, in 1919, Simmy seems to have made an attempt to set himself and his wife into a normal married life. He moved to Mickley, a small village near Ripon, where he acquired Lilac Farm and started to raise chickens. He became involved with the village hall and managed a dance band called the Californians, but he also came involved with the banjo player, a Mrs. Ellis. In 1928, Simmy left Mickley and his wife Lily to set up house with Mrs. Ellis. Quite where this relationship took Simmy's life over the next couple of years is unclear. Headed notepaper suggests an attempt to start an estate agent's business in Scarborough. But the only thing we can say for sure is that by 1931 he was back in Leeds, nearer the caves and the Yorkshire Dales that were once such a big part of his life. It also happened that in that same year a new caving group, the Leeds Caving Club, was formed. when Simmy, now 47, presented himself, complete with his already historic records, they were impressed. By January 1932, he was their president. Possibly disillusioned with relationships, he now appears to have immersed himself back into the caving world. How many times he went underground is quite unclear, but many cave diagrams appeared under his name over this period. The new club had tackle, enthusiasm, and it appears transport, but they also had an excellent cave photographer, Harold Wadsworth Hayward, who took these pictures. Perhaps there was bound to be rivalry between Mr. Hayward and Simmy. He was not only a rival photographer, but also a professional, who was unlikely to release photographs for Simmy's record books. It seems that by 1932, Simmy was disillusioned with the Leeds Caving Club, or vice versa, but nevertheless, he had decided to devote his life to his beloved cave studies.
Within months, he was made president of the Leeds Cave Club, but again, within a few more months, he was kicked out. Basically, it was because he didn't think they were taking the thing seriously enough. They were having tea dances, dinner dances, all sorts of things, and enjoying themselves, but they weren't doing speleological research. And he stood up and said so, and got thrown out for it.
In May that year, he moved to Oswick, in the heart of the Yorkshire Dales. He was now within easy reach of many of his favourite caves, and he could devote himself full-time to redrawing old surveys and putting his precious records of previous years in order. It was the most productive period of his life. However, as he now appeared to have no apparent source of income, how this was all financially possible is something of a mystery.
He didn't just go down caves and survey them and photograph them, but he re-surveyed and redrew the somewhat amateur surveys that he'd drawn in the very early days, from 1903 to 1910, I suppose. The amount of work he did, I don't know. I mean, we don't know whether anybody was living there with him, but I find it hard to believe that he had time to actually make a meal or anything. I think he must have had somebody looking after his domestic affairs because of the total amount of work that he did in those 5 years. It was quite tremendous.
Meanwhile, there were other things, other ambitions going on in his head. Other European countries already had national caving associations. Frenchman Edward Martel, who had made the first descent of Gaping Gill in 1895, was clearly one of Simmy's role models throughout his life. Martel had formed the Société de Spéléologie in France as early as 1885. Resurrected after World War I, it had become the Société Spéléologique de France, a true national organisation. Simmy was already in touch with Martel and other leading European cavers. He was determined that Britain also needed to have its own national caving association.
And it's seen what was going on in Europe, particularly Italy, France, and what was the other one? Austria, I suppose. They'd all formed national organisations. And also he bumped into Professor Leo Palmer, who set up this organisation in Bristol in 1907, I think. And he thought that was where he got, undoubtedly where he got the idea to form a national body that would be a collecting place for all the records and, a centre for speleological excellence, I suppose.
In 1936, the British Speleological Association had its first meeting in some style at the Buxton Town Hall in Derbyshire, at the invitation of the Lord Mayor. It had been formed a year earlier by Eli and Professor Palmer. To give the new association influence, Simi had managed to bring in people of considerable scientific prestige. Sir Arthur Keith FOS, the most eminent archaeologist and anthropologist of the day, was to be president, while the co-founder, Professor Palmer, DSc PhD, was a scientist who had been a caver since his early student days. Simi was given the job he treasured as honorary recorder. There were well-known established cavers there from the different regions too, like Blackman Holden, Digger Harris and James Petrell.
They moved into this prestigious house. This was one of Simi's early objects, to have this centre, and they'd rented the top floor of what was called Cragdale House, Duke Street. The fine picture that appeared in all the magazines was actually of the back of it. So if you're driving down the main road of Settle, now Duke Street, you won't recognise it. Since then, I'm not sure if it is still today, but it has been the police headquarters, and it became famous because that was when there was a cave rescue. That was where the flag was hung out for people to come and join the rescue.
He got his funding from a lady, Miss Montague, and I think that's her name, who was a widow living in Windermere, and she used to come occasionally and dished out most of his finance, and had provided Simpson with enough money to move the BSA into what is now the police station in Settle.
On the 1st of June 1937, the BSA produced the first edition of Caves and Caving. It was to be Britain's first quarterly high-quality caving magazine. Inside, Leo Palmer outlined the aims of the British Speleological Association, which were to be in line with those of the French National Association. Significantly, there was also an article from Simi honouring Edward Martell. The previous month, the BSA also held its first winch meet at Gaping Gill, with a new wooden gantry and petrol-powered winch. It appeared to be that the new National Association was off to an impressive start. It was to be a hugely successful outing, but most of all because of a visiting southerner called Eric Hensler. He may or may not have been guided by Simi, but whatever, he persisted in a low muddy crawl where most would have turned back. He drew a sketch map for Simi when he returned. The Hensler's master cave was to prove a vital breakthrough in the exploration of Gaping Gill. More caves and caving followed, although increasingly they were falling behind schedule. Within the BSA, huge underlying problems were becoming apparent.
His financial understanding was completely unrealistic. The total membership that they got couldn't support the things he wanted to do, the setting up of a library, a record centre, and a regular quality printed magazine, and both of those went into financial difficulty after a matter of months.
I think that the BSA most likely grew beyond the levels of funding that could be provided by its members on an annual subscription basis. For example, the rental of the property Cragdale that was later to become the police station in Settle. Don't know what that cost annually, but I suspect it would have gobbled up a very large percentage, if not all, of the income from subscriptions. Now, you and I both are aware that there were certain of the lady members of the BSA who were most likely, in part anyhow, subsidising the running costs, and perhaps even subsidising Simi's lifestyle, whatever that may have been, as well.
But there were soon to be even larger problems facing the BSA.
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The war on finances led to it didn't fail, but it struggled after that. And he struggled on during the war years with the help of his housekeeper, Christine Rodin, who, whether she was more than a housekeeper, I've no idea. And then, of course, he was having arguments with more and more people.
A letter from Mary Boyd Dawkins to Professor Palmer in August 1939. I am at one with you about Cragdale, perhaps even keener than you to be quit of it, for I have long felt that in Simpson lies the root of the trouble, and with the house he might go also. Anyway, it would provide a context for getting rid of him, and with him would go the atmosphere of rudeness and discourtesy which is so injurious to the interests of the association. Simmy was discovering that his blunt Yorkshire hands-on approach also did not go down well with the prestigious scientists that he himself had recruited.
I think that there was always going to be that dichotomy there between those two, the active sporting caver, if you like, and the academics. Simmy in later years, he used to call them bloody academics. This is after all the big names, if you like, in that particular field who had been members of the BSA had all left for one reason or another, or were shown the door by Simmy. And so he was left basically with only the doers, the people who were out exploring the caves, rather than the academics. And I think that obviously shaped his thinking quite profoundly in where he went after those people resigned or were kicked out of the BSA.
With most of the young men now at war, Simmy needed a new army to fight his caving battles. But where was he to find his recruits?
How shall we extol thee?
Fortunately, there were still those that remained that were willing to explore caves on his behalf. Some were in reserved occupations, some were women, and some too young to be called up.
And he said, why not join as a probationary member? So I had to say, I think I had to save up £half or something for this. But anyway, the next time I went up there, on Saturday afternoon or something, took this money and I was made a member of the BSA. And the man in charge, very much so, was Mr. Simpson, because all the hard men, a lot of the hard men from the BSA were in the forces, you know.
Lack of transport was a major problem. People got up any way they could.
I got a bike, which got me up there and over for years. I was with all the others, you see.
It's a bicycle rather than a motorbike.
Oh, they haven't been invented, I don't think, on motorbikes. Never heard of them, no. Everything was simple, so you got to do simple things. And all we did was go down little simple holes. Oh, you see, all we got was candles. Little candles, and I had a technique for normal pitches. If I had a candle, I'd blow it out and put it in my pocket.
The pitch in the dark?
Yes. I was trying, honestly.
He had two areas of interest, really. One was Ingleborough, and the other was the Stump Cross area. And Stump Cross in particular was an area where caves had been found by lead miners in the a century earlier, and he was fascinated by the fact that there were all these mineral veins, and they were very closely associated with natural cavities. it came about that people like Lord Ribblesdale owned huge collections of. They owned acres of land and they'd got the rights to the mineral. They had these rich deposits, as it were, of loads and loads of big mining plans, some of which, of course, would lead to finding caves, and that's how he got into that. He bought a lot of stuff at a sale of Lord Ribblesdale's records, I think in Hellifield in about 1930.
One person above all others provided Simmy with exactly the sort of help he needed. At the start of the war, Bob Leakey was working on aircraft design at Eden Airport and was consequently not conscripted.
I got some digs at what used to be a sort of bed and breakfast place for women only, and I moved into that place, and at the weekends, because I had a car, I used to take them all out until we get to up round Settle and take them where I could and this stuff. And that's when I first started doing caving.
It must have been the biggest find that Eli had, really. He was very fit and he'd go down any hole, and the number of things that he actually pushed that everybody said wouldn't lead anywhere were tremendous. I think Disappointment Pot was one.
Mossdale Cavern was another. It is still regarded as one of the hardest and most dangerous caves in Yorkshire, and Leakey explored it almost entirely with the help of women.
And Gassington Moor was classic. I mean, when he got the plans showing that there'd been some huge caverns in the middle of Gassington Moor found by miners in 1850, and he got these plans from what is now the British Geological Survey, he set about going down every one, and in those days there must have been hundreds of mine shafts open on Gassington Moor. I suspect most of them are now collapsed. And Bob was just a man. He had this his little ferret, that was it, Bob. He had this little ferret going down all these holes and pushing out all the passages that led off them. But sadly, they never found the lost caverns, and they are the key to the Gassington Moor Black Kelp drainage system, without any doubt.
Strangely, it would be an exciting find on Casterton Fell that was to lead the BSA towards its final demise, and the discoverers were BSA members. Ron Bliss told the story.
One of these was George Corns. He was born in Oxford, but moved to Lancaster during the war. He was amongst the elite, because he had a sidecar attached to his motorbike.
Bill Taylor was up the top there digging holes, and I dug down about 2 feet. No results. I called Bill Taylor down, and he came down here and he just pulled one rock, and it just was another. We hear it rattling down the pitch. So we dug like fury to get a hole large enough to lower a person down, and we tied the rope around him, lowered him down for 15 feet, and after a few seconds he told us to pull him back. When he came out, he said it was a shaft at least 100 feet deep, and little did we realise at that time that we discovered the largest cave system in England.
As soon as it was realised the magnitude of this discovery, the BSA leased the land from the owner and put a locked lid on the entrance. Only trips authorised by Mr. Eli Simpson, who ran the BSA, were allowed in, and these privileged few were coming back each week with tales of more and more wonders that they had found.
But were you involved in the exploration of some of those caves as well?
Well, I was doing plans and that sort of thing, exploration, quite a lot.
What, drawing up the surveys?
Yes, well, making the surveys and drawing them up, yes.
So you were doing the surveying?
Oh, yes. Wouldn't trust anybody else with it.
He tried to control it, you see, and he tried to do it in sort of dictatorial ways, and it won't work, will he, you see?
Well, he would. Bless him, I mean, he saved a lot of things by that process, but he didn't endear himself to a lot of people because he wanted to keep people out of it who would do harm or access it too readily and so on.
So he was a real conservationist?
Oh, for himself.
This state of affairs went on for 3 years, and as rumours of the discoveries leaked out to the rest of the caving world, requests by other clubs to visit were denied.
The trouble is with a discovery this size is that you're faced with several alternative propositions. One is, are you going to close the thing up completely and only let a very, very few privileged people in, or are you going to allow other clubs to use it? Now, after a while, the friction built up to such an extent that that explosives were used. If you look down there, you can see the old lids where they've one after the other been put on and blown off. Now, I can understand clubs getting annoyed about lids on pots, because tradition is that round here, for all the years they've been caving, they've had free access to all the potholes, and this was a new venture. And the rigid attitudes were the things that led to this bad situation. I feel that if we'd had limited access and proper control, we could have kept the lid on, and we could have preserved the cave a lot longer than it has been preserved.
That Simi was fairly far-sighted. He also, I think, once the initial phases of exploration had been carried out, recognised that this was a major hole with all sorts of potential, all sorts of unique features, not just stalactites and stalagmites, but some of the levels of passages, the information that may contain, and the information that could be gained from it vis-a-vis sort of geomorphological happenings on Lancaster fells, for example. I think he was quite well aware of that. And he wanted, perhaps again though, to maintain certain of his influence, to be able to be the person who could say, you can go because I know you're going to come back out and give me the detail that I'm seeking. You can't because you're just a Me Too caver and you're likely to trash bits of it and not produce anything of any worth for me afterwards.
He had the sense of realising that you've got to be pretty powerful at closing things down or safeguarding them or publishing them, perhaps. He had all that in mind. And you don't get many people who do that. They either want to rush out, as Bob Leakey would, and find new places and so on, and explore here and there.
So all these rumblings went on. In the end, forget Lancaster Hole directly, but in the end, there's 6 of us we were BSA members, and we resigned and formed the NPC.
And Leakey, for a while, was a staunch supporter and was one of those who went back and reconcreted things, but I think even he got weary of it in the finish and thought this was no real way to carry on. And so I suspect that all of those sort of things hastened, if you like, Bob's split with the BSA.
And Simi, of course, wanted, he was two-sided, as it were. He wanted to safeguard it all and publish it if necessary and make access to it and so on. But he wanted to do it from his own point of view. He didn't like people mixing in on it.
It was about this time that Mr. Simpson realised that this cave was going further than he'd expected, and it was going beyond the bounds of his lease and towards the higher reaches of East Gill, where there are numerous sinks of the stream, but little known cave. The surveys that his loyal team were giving him each week he plotted out, but then showed them a false plan showing the cave going up towards Crag Hill. But they weren't fools, and the row that ensued resulted in a big break-up of the BSA, and 2 new clubs were formed: the Northern Pennine with George Dr. Aspin with his trademark USA tin helmet from the war, and Arthur Gemmell, and many others. The other group, founded by Wolf Taylor, was the Red Rose Cave and Pothole Club with Jim Ayres. Strangely, a number of the early explorers seem to have given up caving about this time.
The Red Rose Pothole Club and the Northern Pennine Club was formed really because of a dispute about how they went about exploring Lancaster Hole series, and there was quite a sizable exodus of people. I'm not quite sure what year the Northern Pennine Club was formed, but it was in its infancy when I first started to come up here on a regular basis. People like Jim Leach and Butch Burgess, Malcolm Riley, and then they were not people who I ever knew to be active with the BSA, but they had been at an early day.
BSA originally was set up, as the name implies, an association. It wasn't meant to be a caving club. Circumstances forced it down that route to be a caving club. It lost that ability to be a collector of information from whoever and wherever, and finally it was forced down a narrower route to becoming just a caving club.
Simpson didn't like the fact that I was not very loyal to the BSA, and used to go caving with anybody who could keep up with me. Apparently that was one of the complaints, that I used to leave everybody behind in caving and things like that. And I remember getting a notice from the treasurer in Sheffield saying that I was excluded or chucked out of the BSA. It certainly grieved me very much. Then things seemed to go wrong with the BSA all the way down the line.
The numbers were diminishing, no doubt about that. In some ways that was a good thing as far as I was concerned, because it meant that I got greater access to Simmy's records and time to study them than might have been the case otherwise. It also, I suppose, put me in a strong position, providing I could come across with the goodies as far as he was concerned, then I was going to get more from him still. And he instilled in me this business about note-taking, record things, don't rely on your memory, and that's stuck with me ever since. Diaries I keep now are still really something that's a continuation of what was started by talking to Simmy 1957, 1958 onward.
Yeah, so this is a Simpson shot, fantastic. And these, I think you said that these were given to you after Eli Simpson's death, is that right?
Yes, he kept them in the headquarters, such as it was,
in Settle.
In Settle, yes. Well, he was living and operating it, and Christine, she looked after him, and indeed as he got more fragile, she was spending a lot of her time looking after him physically in one way or another. And then when he died, fairly suddenly as it were, though expected for some time.
Yes.
And so she, I think, tried to rescue what she could, and that's why I got some of these given to me from her in trying to safeguard the collections.
I've got no doubt in my own mind, I don't think, that he was one of the pivotal characters in rolling forward British caving, to keeping records, starting to survey caves accurately, or as accurately as possible with the equipment available at that time. I know other clubs carried out surveys, the Yorkshire Ramblers Club for example, things like Lost Johns. But Simmy went back and redid some of their material, or did things jointly with some of these other clubs. If there were bits that came along, he would see if they could tack theirs onto his, or the other way round. Sometimes it would all come out under his name, even though the original material was done by someone else. That's irrelevant to me. He was one of those people who recognised the value of recording this information in a meaningful way, not just with surveys, but with notes, written accounts of what was down particular caves and potholes, and in his photos. And some of his photos were, at that time, world-class photography, won him awards, and You know, I think that with the equipment available, the results were absolutely staggering. So, yeah, I think that he really should never be belittled for his position in British caving. He may have been the one that fragmented it later on, which is regrettable, obviously, but nevertheless, the role that he played, as I say, was a vital one at that sort of beginnings of recording stuff.
I think from the point of view of Britain, I think he was almost the inventor of the word speleology. It might have been in use in America at the time, but it wasn't in the vocabulary of the Yorkshire Ramblers or the Craven Posso Club in those days.
Two small passages led off from here. One was too tight, and the other was so beautiful it was all pure white, walls, floor, ceiling, with crystal pools on the floor. No room for even the smallest person to get in without doing untold damage. Dr. Aspin called it Perfection Passage, and he expressly forbade anyone from even thinking about entering. Alas, look at it today, and the pity is it didn't even go anywhere.
When I first entered this chamber, this colonnade chamber in Lancaster Hall, it was a sight to see. The ceiling was beautiful and white, the walls were white, crisscrossed with calcite. These columns, you can see the tops of these now, it's so beautiful. Gradually, cavers have put their hands on them. See the result now. And across the floor, which was also beautiful white crystal, is now covered in mud. Here's another column, just adjacent to those we're just looking at, which is some clowns climbed this in the past. Don't know why, we just wanted to climb it, and it broke. We had another group of cavers who were appalled at this desecration, so they came in here and mixed araldite and various chemicals together, rigged this in splints like a broken limb, and it's now coming back to normal.